So now I want to talk to you about shorting the US dollar. Okay. This is a pretty reliable bet. Now, maybe some of you have played the stock market and you've shorted various stock. And when you short something, that means you are betting on it going down in value. And since the Federal Reserve came along over 100 years ago now, that's our central bank in the US, since they came along, the dollar has lost about 97% of its value. It's pretty reliable that the dollar is going to go down in value over time. Now, the question is compared to what? Is it going to go down in value compared to things you buy at the store? Meaning those things that you buy will look more expensive. And we've all seen that, especially during the Biden era. The dollar went down in value by a whole bunch. But what if you compare the dollar to other currencies? So is it down compared to the euro or the yen or the peso? I mean, there's many pesos, but say the Mexican peso or the Brazilian real. There's all these different currencies. And the dollar might be strong against other currencies, but weak against goods and services that end up costing more. So these things are complicated, and there are many layers of the onion you have to peel back. But what I want to show you now is how to win the game of inflation. Inflation is a pretty persistent thing, and it looks like we're going to have a lot of it in the future. We've got 37 trillion with a T, trillion dollars in debt. We've got big deficits we're running every single year. And it looks like there's really no end in sight to this kind of stuff. And all of that government spending and bad management creates inflationary pressure. In other words, it devalues the dollar. Okay. So as that dollar goes down, most people get hurt, right? The vast majority of people who aren't in the investor class, especially the real estate investor class, they are hurting. They are losing. Everything they buy, everything in their life gets more expensive. The groceries get more expensive. The car payments get more expensive. The health insurance or the health care gets more expensive. Everything they buy just gets worse and worse, and their income does not keep pace. But if you are investing in income property, you're going to win this game. And I'm going to show you how in a way that you may not be familiar with. And the government is in a tough situation. And I've identified 6 ways that I think the government has to get out of this mess, okay? The first way is they could just say, look, we know we owe $37 trillion. We're increasing our debt at about $1 trillion every 100 days, and we just can't pay it. Sorry, too bad, default. We're just going to not pay the bills. So we're going to default on our Social Security obligations, Medicare, Medicaid. We're just not going to keep the promises we've made. Sorry, too bad. And this would be very politically unpopular. If you want an example of it, just remember Greece about 12 years ago, no, about 15 years ago now, when they instituted these really what they thought were severe austerity measures. And we've seen this happen in France and the UK, and we've seen the riots in the streets as austerity measures are implemented. And this is a politician's worst nightmare, because they do not want to be unpopular. They want to stay in power and be popular. And the way they do that is by acting like they're Santa Claus and just giving out stuff, right? Okay, so they're probably not going to default. They could raise taxes to pay the bills, right? The problem is this is mathematically impossible at this point. We're too deep into the mess. There's no way you could raise taxes enough to solve the problem. Now, in addition to the debt and the deficits that I talked about a minute ago, the government has an even much bigger problem than that. And that bigger problem is that the government has unfunded promises going into the future. Unfunded entitlements, unfunded mandates, whatever you want to call it, promises the government has made that it simply has no mathematical way to keep the promise. So there's debate over how much the government has promised. Estimates go anywhere from $60 trillion to $220 trillion. Now, when people throw out these big numbers, it always frustrates me because most people can't relate to that. None of us have had $1 trillion, so we just can't relate. But let's ask, compared to what? Life's most important question. So compared to what? Well, how about compared to the value of the economy in the United States every year? That's a good comparison. How bad is this really? Well, The GDP of the country, the entire value of the economy of the country for 1 year is about $30 trillion. So if we have $30 trillion value of the economy, and if you could tax every piece of that at 100%, that means the government would take in $30 trillion. But immediately everybody would stop working and say, why bother? I'm going to starve to death working. Why am I going to do that? Right? So that's not going to work. There's just not enough money from taxes to solve the problem. The current amount the government takes in now is about $4 trillion. So you can just do the math, right? Deficits, debt, unfunded promises into the future, between $60 and $220 trillion, and we take in $4 trillion a year. How are we going to solve that problem? It's impossible to solve. Okay, so what else could the government do? They could have a yard sale. We could sell assets. See, we're just looking at profit and loss of the government so far. Income, expenses, right? 4 trillion income, whatever, 7 trillion expenses. So that's the deficit. And then all this debt that has to be repaid somehow. So the government could sell off the ports. Remember years ago when we were talking about selling the ports to Dubai? That didn't happen. But, the government does sell off other stuff. Trump wants to sell off federal lands to developers to solve the housing problem. By the way, that's not going to solve the housing problem, but it's an idea. The Bureau of Land Management has always sold off land. We sell military equipment to other countries. Some of them turn around and become our enemies 20 years later. So that's probably not the best idea. Toll roads within the country are owned, at least in part, by foreign governments, China being one of them. So there are assets that the country could sell, right, to raise money. They could steal. They could use the American military to basically steal the resources of other countries. And you might say, well, that's awful. Well, that's the map of the world. I mean, that's the history of the world is, one military stealing stuff from another country, right? That's what has always happened. It's not good. It's not nice, but it's the way things are. Technological innovation. This is a positive one. This could really be good. We've all been amazed by artificial intelligence in the past couple of years, and it's only getting better, like on a weekly basis. It's incredible, the AI revolution that's going on. But other areas are energy, biotechnology, nanotechnology. I don't know if you saw this article that scientists made the world's smallest violin. Yes, this violin is so small, it was made with nanotechnology, that it can only be seen with a microscope. And it is dramatically smaller than the width of one human hair. Okay. It is so small, but it really exists, right? And nanotechnology is going to be an amazing revolution in terms of what it will do for our health and longevity and just everything. It's incredible. But here's the most likely thing that will happen. And why do I say it's the most likely? Well, because it's already been happening. It's been happening for decades. And it is going to continue. Nothing is for sure, but this is about as sure as you can get, in my opinion, and that is inflation. The government will simply inflate away its debts. Years ago, I had on my podcast Pat Buchanan. You might remember that name. He ran for president a couple of times, and Pat Buchanan was on my show, and he said something just so poetically. He said, for people who are in debt, their debts will be floated away on a sea of inflation. And that is so true. In other words, how does the government do this? Well, they've been doing it for a long time. So the government pays out benefits, say it's disability benefits or Social Security benefits or whatever, right? And it pays these out in what's called nominal dollars. But when there's inflation, the value of those nominal dollars goes down. And so when you consider the value of that Social Security check in real dollars, it's much lower. And this is the game they've been playing for a long, long time, and they will keep playing. And this is why so many people are so upset that the standard of living keeps declining, because the government is inflating away the value of everything. Inflation is a tax. Just call it a tax. That's exactly what it is. We have income tax, we have a whole bunch of other taxes, sales tax, property tax, all these other taxes, right? But inflation is also a tax because it debases the value of your savings and your earnings.